Hi, I'm Micah Clark. Thank you for joining us today. Today I have a friend that we've had on before. You may remember David Lantz. He's an active teacher, activist. I knew David when he was running the Indiana Christian Coalition back in the 90s, so we've been friends for a long time. But he's also an author who's written several books. We're going to talk about his latest book today that fits into today being 4th of July and this time when we're thinking about our nation's foundings. I thought it was a perfect time to have David come on, talk about his new book. He's also been very involved in civics, which ties into this book as well. But first, David, thanks for coming on. And first question I wanted to ask you, tell our audience about the other books you've written, because it goes back a long time. Some of them are not available maybe, but tell us about some of the other books you've written.
Well, thank you. I have a book that you've had me talk about before called The Unraveling of We the People. I wrote that back in 2017, looking at sort of the history of how we got to where we are in terms of education and civics, and think of the Constitution being torn in part with the words "we the people" broken in half, and the unraveling, so to speak. And I've written a book called Think Like Jesus, Lead Like Moses, and you and I worked on that when we were doing some Tea Party grassroots seminars and things of that nature.
And that book talks a lot about your history and the lessons you learned with Christian Coalition
Absolutely.
as a statewide activist.
Applying, as I was reading the stories of Moses and being a leader and trying to apply them as I was the state director of the Indiana Christian Coalition in the early to mid 1990s. I've written a couple of novels, historical Christian fiction around the exile of the Jews to Babylon. And one that you also interviewed me is the Chronicles of Belteshazzar, taking the story of Daniel as a grandfather tells his grandchildren, sort of like the Princess Bride type of a movie. So, I like to do that sort of thing in my spare time.
Well, you talk about your spare time. I know you have a lot because you're actively teaching. Tell us about that too.
I discovered back around the year 2003 that my master's degree was in demand. I have a master's in public affairs with a concentration in economic analysis and quantitative statistical analysis. And lo and behold, people wanted various schools like University of Phoenix, Indiana Tech, Indiana Wesleyan, and Ivy Tech wanted instructors as adjuncts who could do that sort of thing. And so for the last 25 years, I've been an adjunct instructor teaching those topics. I'm a part-time temp worker who hasn't lacked for work to do.
Well, I know you're very passionate about young people and high schoolers and education, government, and civics. That's because you've written a couple books, and this latest one is different because it's very creative, and I've seen the proofs of it. There's a lot of activities in it, but tell us the name of your new book and what led you to write this new book.
Well, the book,
because it's different than your others.
It's very different, and there's a good reason, because I have a partner this time. and so the book is titled Run, Win, Lead, A Student's Guide to Becoming a Successful Political Leader. There's a woman by the name of Sarah Janisse Brown and her husband Josh Brown. They have a company called The Thinking Tree. They essentially publish books for the homeschool market. They've done over 300 books, so I think it's funlearning.com or something like that. If you were to Google Fun Learning, you'd find their website. And Sarah approached me about doing a book on becoming a successful political leader. We had met working with Jamie Rittenauer running for governor, and so we both live in the Greenwood area and maybe 5 miles apart, so it was very easy to work with her and so forth. So we started on this project a little over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and so she has done a lot of the illustrations, a lot of the assignments, and taking what I would normally do as a college professor, write me an essay, write me a paper, and she puts it into make a picture, draw a picture of yourself thinking about running for governor or whatever. And so that's I'm going to credit her with all the imaginative assignments that are things that I would not have thought of.
Well, one thing I like about your book, I know you've given me some questions, but you got my brain going because I've seen your book, and I was thinking about the book you wrote on civics and the unraveling, and your book is different. One of the things you revealed when you studied civics is that a lot of civics education, which when people hear about that, they think, oh, that's great. We'll learn about the Constitution, about how government works. But what you revealed and what you found in your research is a lot of civics education today is teaching kids how to be liberal community activists.
Yes.
Your book's not doing that.
No.
Your book is teaching more activities to be civically involved. And there's a difference, I think, between civic engagement and political indoctrination.
Right.
So did that come up when you were thinking about this book? Because I know you're concerned about that, and this is kind of taking a different angle in that regard.
Well, certainly I want people to become conservative, moral agents working for the betterment of humanity. And if you think about politics, most people, I think these days, especially young people, think of politics as a talking head on some sort of TV show, and that's not politics at all. Politics, I feel, is the art of getting a lot of people to work together for the common good to accomplish something. Maybe it is cleaning up your neighborhood because it's messed up. Maybe it's electing somebody to city council to help fight crime in your neighborhood. Maybe it's because a highway is going to come through your neighborhood and divide it. That was a problem in the 50s and the 60s. And it can be a lot of things. So how does a young person figure out how to do that? And so one of the things in the book I talk about are 12 things that a lot of political campaigns ask people to volunteer to do. It might be knocking on doors. It might be writing letters to the editor. It might be going to some sort of a rally and doing stuff, all sorts of things. And so the book talks about what these things are. And one of the assignments is for you, the student, to volunteer with something. It could be a food bank. It could be a homeless shelter. It doesn't have to be a political campaign. Just volunteer with something and then journal about that and write about your experience of volunteering for somebody else and being involved in the community, the civics of the community. And that's what I would really like people to think about.
Well, I know you highlighted a couple presidents for study in your book. What led you to do that? Was it something maybe in elementary school that we used to do, we don't do now so much, maybe?
Well, I'm older than you, so you might not have ever seen the old TV series Davy Crockett starring Fess Parker. But I was, a kid, and I was fascinated. Davy Crockett. Well, my name's Davy. I want to become like Davy Crockett. So I read biographies about Davy Crockett. I read biographies about lots of other people. I read about Abraham Lincoln. I read about Genghis Khan. I read about Marco Polo. And so one of the things that we encourage in the book is for young people to read biographies. What made great people great in history? What is it that we remember about them? What kind of qualities about their personality, their moral character do you learn? So we've got two very specific assignments dealing with Abraham Lincoln and Davy Crockett, where it's a kind of a fill in the blank as you follow the history of their political development from starting at nothing to getting elected, in Lincoln's case to president, in Davy Crockett's case to the United States Congress. So, but then the encouragement to find some other person in history to do a similar kind of review and write up about that.
Well, I as a hobby, on a side note, I like muzzleloaders. So I've actually listened to Davy Crockett's autobiography.
Really?
And it's interesting because if you look at Crockett, and both Crockett and Abraham Lincoln, formally their education level was not very high, but they're extremely intelligent men who carried themselves very far through what they did know. And so I always find it interesting when students read about older historical figures, how intelligent they are, because we tend to think today we're the greatest and smartest generation ever. But there's a lot of knowledge to be learned from people who lived before us.
Yes.
So what were some of the things that stood out to you about those two men?
Well, thinking about intelligence, people talk about emotional intelligence, they talk about book learning intelligence. And one of the things I observed is that Abraham Lincoln, as you know, taught himself to read. He taught himself the law. He was very book intensive. He did a lot of activities, but he was very book intensive. Davy Crockett, on the other hand, probably was not nearly as literately minded, but he was activity minded. And so he learned by learning to hunt, to do what the Indians did, all that sort of thing. And so I highlight that so that you as a student, you don't have to be a cookie cutter sort of politician. There's lots of ways to get involved in leadership. I quote from John Quincy Adams, who talks about if you can motivate people to do things, to learn things, or become things, whatever those sorts of things are, if you're motivating others to do that, you are a leader. And I love that type of definition of leadership. And so political leadership is the main focus of the book, but leadership generally is really what we're trying to accomplish here.
Now, this isn't in the book, but I know this is where your heart is too. You worked at the budget committee years ago in the State House. Of course, we're involved in the State House. One of the things you notice very quickly when you work down there, and I worked in constituent services my first year out of college, the percentage of people who are engaged actively is very, very small. The number of phone calls they get is very, very small, which means those who are involved have a disproportionate influence on those who aren't. And so your book kind of hones in on, you can really make a difference by doing certain things. So what are some of the things that you encourage kids to do right out of the gate?
It's interesting you say that. I have a student, his first name is Matthew, I won't go into his last name. And you might remember back during the 2011, 2012 time period, we were dealing with Common Core. And there was a huge rally of lots of people at the State House. Well, this young man, Matthew, was about 11 or 12 when his mom, who was a homeschool mom, took her family downtown to the State House. He was at that same rally that I'm sure you spoke of and spoke at. I was in the background and stuff. And so I had him as a student in a course that I teach on the Great Reset for an organization called Vertical Immersive. He's now 20, 21 years of age. And he and I basically relate to that point in time when he was 11 or 12. And so what I want to encourage people is, just look around you and see what can happen. So here's a thought I want to throw out for us to talk about, and also for your listeners to think about. The 250th anniversary of the country is coming up very soon. I had a teacher in 5th grade. Her name was Mrs. Mays, and she had all the kids in the class pick a president, do some research about them, pretend you were that president and say, here's what I'm going to do when I get elected. And so you'd have to research to know. I think I had James Monroe, but not really sure. At any rate, so what's James Monroe going to do as president? Yada, yada, yada. And I think, although I've positioned the book for high school age, if you think about elementary school, 5th, 6th grade, imagine having a class where let's vote on a guy who was president, say in the 1800s, and take the top 2 that the kids vote on. Now let's have a political campaign, and I talk about the things that you do to promote a candidate volunteering-wise in the book. And let's see if we can get the school to vote on which of these 2 people from history they would elect to be president today. Now, that's going to force them to learn about what was going on in the 1800s. It's going to what happened during the administration of whichever of the 2 presidents are that they come up with. They learn a little bit about campaigning and promoting whomever, and they can follow the book Run, Win, Lead to get some ideas. I think that would be a great way to engage young people in the 250th anniversary and the history of our country.
It's funny you mentioned James Monroe because he's famous for the Monroe Doctrine, which is very relevant right now when we have a lot of wars going on. How should America be involved? Monroe had some very distinct views about that are even applicable today about what role America should play in foreign policy.
Absolutely. And as you know, the big superpowers of his day were France and England. And so we were not yet a superpower. We were pretty much trying to avoid being crushed. And in fact, just before him under Madison, Washington, the city of Washington was burned down during the War of 1812. So we were still just trying to figure out what to do as a new country. So yeah, it would give people a lot of perspective and a lot of understanding of in every century, in every time period, problems exist. Whatever, if you're in, I don't know, say 10th grade right now today, whatever the problems are that we're going to be facing in the 2040s, they're going to be different from today. How are you going to be prepared as a young person who's going to be a leader in the 2040s to help America get through the next crisis that we are sure to face?
Well, one of the presidents you highlight in your book is my favorite president in my lifetime, Ronald Reagan, for a lot of reasons. But kids today, I mean, to me, you and me, that was like yesterday.
Yes.
But every kid in high school was born way after President Reagan was even alive.
Sure.
So you focus on his communication skills. Tell me about that a little bit.
You
As a
know,
lesson in your
yeah,
book.
one of the things that I think I did the best thing for my career, a friend of mine invited me to join an organization called Toastmasters International. And so one of the chapters has to deal with communication skills. Toastmasters has a number of speeches that they talk about, but I hone in on three. One is called the icebreaker, where you tell people about yourself. If you're going to run for political office, you got to find an interesting way to tell about yourself. Another thing that you've got to do is you've got to speak to inform. How do I inform people? And a third thing that you need to do is to persuade them to adopt whatever recommendation you have, or to elect you for office, or whatever the topic might be.
Or even a job interview, you need those things.
Oh, absolutely. You have to sell yourself to get that job. So learning how to communicate, not just speaking, but writing, listening so that you hear the question that is asked, not the question you are expecting to answer. That's very important. You know, there's lots of organizations that are out there. I have a friend, his name is David Osborne. He was the former governor of the Southern Indiana district of the Optimist Clubs. He was telling me that in their speech contests, which I have helped to judge, we've gotten to know, he was a former student of mine, a college student, and I've been a judge for various speech contests. But he said that their speech and their essay contests, if you finish like number one or something like that, up to $24,000 in scholarship money.
Wow. Now,
I'm not saying that everybody has that amount of money, but you know, Right to Life has that sort of thing. There's the Young Farmers of America have that sort of thing. So there's all sorts of organizations out there that we talk about in the book that have either a speech contest or an essay contest that you as a young person, if you're into any of those organizations and what they promote, you could basically get involved in learning how to hone your communication skills.
Well, next question that you put forward is, I think, is very interesting, is where we work kind of at AFA. I'm just going to read the question because that was very good. Most people have a hard time thinking about how other people besides themselves are affected by legislation.
Yeah.
So tell us about stakeholders and about how legislation affects people.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, you know, especially families, we just live our lives, and until they get their property tax bill, they don't hone in on, you know, maybe politics.
Yeah.
But everything around us is affected by that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, stakeholders and the concept of a stakeholder is very important. A stakeholder is simply somebody or some group of people who are affected by an event or a project or something like that. I teach a course for one of the schools that I teach for. It's state and local politics. And my students have to write me a policy memo, which they have to pretend like they're an advisor to an elected official, where they've done the research on both sides of an issue. Most of my students don't know how to analyze the issue from the opposing point of view. But if you're going to be honest about it, you've got to recognize that there are other groups of people that are affected by all of this.
Right.
Okay, so now here's a personal story that this is the first time I've shared this with anybody outside of a small number of folks. But my mother had throat cancer when she was pregnant with me.
Okay.
She actually wasn't sure if she would survive giving birth to me. I was born in 1956, long before Roe versus Wade. And so, but she carried me to term, and she's 94 right now. In fact, you've met her.
I've met her.
And so when people write about my body, my choice with regard to abortion, a stakeholder that they're not thinking about is the unborn child.
Right.
I actually had a student in my class a few years ago who survived her own abortion.
Wow.
And so these are difficult topics, and the student and I talked about that privately because I'm teaching state and local government, or not, American history, and we get into the topic of court cases. Roe versus Wade comes up, and so students in private will share with me things that they would never speak about in public. So everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but they need to at least figure out, if I get what I want, how does that affect other people? Even if I believe firmly that whatever I want is the best thing, there's always going to be people that have a different point of view. Stakeholders, how do I try to include their viewpoint as well?
Well, yeah, I know you're an economist too, or you teach economics a lot. There's a quote from Hayek who talks about the key to understanding economics is understanding the secondary consequences of a policy. And that's what you're talking about. How does that spread out to other people? And I think it's important to know, both sides of an issue, because you're going to run into that. Let me, you encourage kids a lot to get involved in politics, not necessarily to make them politicians, but for the very, very value of that type of thing. Tell us a little bit about that.
In this past semester, I teach a dual credit high school classes for one of the schools that I teach for, and I had two students at the end of the semester tell me that they were just fascinated with the way I taught the subject matter. One student wants to go into being a secondary school teacher, high school, teaching American government and things of that nature. So I actually have another book project that we can talk about another time that I'm having these two students look over for me so they can get, from a student's point of view, what they think about this sort of thing. And so I've had students that now have a master's degree in economics, master's degree in American history, so I try to keep in touch with former students. It's always a pleasure to see that sort of thing. But to know even the students that don't agree with the point of view I might express, say, what I like about Mr. Lantz is he makes me think. And that, if I can do that, then I think that I've accomplished something. So at the end of the day, there was an article that came out about a month or so ago, talked about we have credentialed students that are illiterate. What the article meant was we graduated people that have a high school degree or even a college degree, but they don't understand anything. Why? Because they don't read and they don't get the context. So that's another thing that I hope to encourage people to get some context. Read biographies. You'll learn all sorts of new words, what they mean, and you'll be exposed to a bunch of new ideas.
Well, I think one of the things they learn too is that some of the issues we're dealing with now, we've been dealing with for centuries.
Oh yeah.
It's not just a new issue. It's just phrased differently or around the times. But as I looked at your book, my first thought, of course, as a homeschool dad, this book's going to really appeal, I think, to homeschool parents who are looking for activities in their history and government classes. So, and your book is full of activities. It's not just a book. There's all sorts of projects that parents can take or students can take on their own and use. Is that you think your key market? Oh,
absolutely. And that's another reason for partnering with Sarah Brown and her company, The Thinking Tree, because their market is the homeschool market. And so I think that that's a very vital thing. And education is changing. More and more, as you know, more and more states are exploring homeschool, or at least public school types of things, that we're going to see a whole evolution as the internet unfolds and new sorts of teaching comes along. And I teach online all the time, and I try to use new technology that is used for communicating ideas. And certainly using YouTube videos. I mean, that didn't exist when I was in school. And so think of a project where the students as a team maybe create a video project to explain what they do. I have my students do that. I have several courses where I require my students to get together as a team and put together a video presentation of what they would have once done as a read their notes from a lectern, which is old school.
Yeah. I think one of the things, if there was a positive to COVID, there probably wasn't any, but people realized this can be done from home or this can be done online. It opened up alternatives that maybe we weren't thinking about. We knew they were out there, but now more people were using them. So.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. It was in a green book that you had to go to the library. So you'd spend all your time looking for articles, only to discover that the library did not get the journal articles that you wanted. And now you can find stuff on the internet on virtually any topic you're interested in.
It kind of makes you wonder if libraries are going to be around in 20 or 30 years with the internet. But as we close, tell our audience, I know your book is coming out about this time around the 4th, maybe next week. Tell our audience how they can get it, even though it may not be ready today. It's close.
So a couple of things. I know that Sarah Brown has a couple of Facebook groups on fun learning on Facebook. And so one thing that people can do is to look for her groups online. She's going to be promoting it there. It's going to be on Amazon. I just can't tell you exactly when it's coming out. I know it's coming out The plan is anyway in early July. It would be great if it came out on the 4th of July,
Right.
but I can't predict that.
Sure.
But I'll be sure to let you know when it is actually out. So we'll see about that. But if you were to look for Run, Win, Lead, that's the first part of the title. The rest of it is a student's guide to becoming a successful political leader, but certainly Run, Win, Lead. And so Sarah has done the artwork for the cover. I think it's pretty appealing for younger minds, and so if it's not boring like something I would come up with.
Well, it's a great time this summer to get the book, and then parents get ready for August when school goes back, or when they start teaching, or teachers grab it to use for ideas. So they
if I can throw out an idea, because Sarah's company is basically set up for curriculum with various departments of education around the country, you could encourage your school to acquire the book and use it in whether it's public school or a church school classroom.
And if I remember right, on some Amazon books, there's a preview they include too, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So parents can look at it, and when it goes up, and order it online or through Facebook. And at some point, maybe we can put a link out in our email about it.
Very good.
Well, David, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that kind of snippet of what's coming out here in just a few days, I believe, as this airs on the 4th of July. I want to wish everyone a happy holiday today and a remembrance of the great freedoms of the great country that we are, the freedoms that are really unique in the world today that we remember on this 4th of July as this video airs. But again, hope you have a great weekend, great holiday. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Micah Clark with the American Family Association, and thank you for joining us.